One choice can change your beliefs, decide your friends, determine your loyalties, and transform you forever. This is my book review of Divergent. So the first time I read Divergent was almost half a year ago now, and it was when some people, including some of my friends who are fans of the book, told me that this book could be the next Hunger Games. And when I heard that from them, I was like, oh really? Well, I'll give it a shot then. And I reread it this past week since the movie's coming out, and I have to tell you guys that the first and second time reading this book is really great because of how good the book is. It's a good read. The good points. So I think the main good point about Divergent is the amount of detail that Veronica Roth puts into this book. And by the way, Veronica Roth is the author. And I say that because I felt like the same amount of detail that Suzanne Collins put into the Hunger Games when she was talking about the government and all the districts and how the whole government and country works. While in Divergent, Veronica Roth talks about the 5 factions and how the government works in the city. And I thought that Veronica Roth also did a good job of writing the characters, especially the main characters, Triss and Four. And I also thought that she wrote the situations that they go through really well. Because there are many moments where it's like, holy crap, what? Or it's like, wow, that's a shocker. Or it's like, oh, no. Or it's like, no, don't let that happen. I thought that Veronica Roth put me on a roller coaster with like all these situations that were happening. And I don't want to say it was crazy, but there were just some moments where it's like crazy, and it's like, wow. And speaking of the characters, Triss and Four, I said were great. They were written well by Veronica. They were very believable in my opinion. And I also liked the supporting characters in this book, which included Triss's family, the rest of the members of Dauntless, the other transfers, which included Will and Al and Christina, including Peter, Molly, and Drew, yeah. I also thought that Veronica Roth did a really good job with the character development as well, because, especially with Triss, since we see everything through her point of view. Because you see Triss go from this small, weak little girl from Abnegation, which is just this, like, selfless faction, one of the factions in this, like, government and a society, and she transforms herself into this strong-willed person in Dauntless, which is really just the army, basically, in this government/society. And it felt like really believable because you were going with her through this journey, through the initiation process, and you thought to yourself, yeah, that does make sense, that she went from this, like, pathetic person into this strong person. I also like the mystery portion of Divergent as well, because immediately you find out that you're in Chicago. Like, they don't say Chicago. All Triss says is that the tallest building, the Sears Tower, and you can infer that they're in Chicago. And Triss doesn't say Chicago since there's not really a name to like her place or anything. And she goes on saying how there was this war and everything, and you sort of wonder, like, well, what happened? Like, how long was this war for? Like, how long has it been since this war? And you start to wonder, are there other places like this, or is this the only place where there are just these 5 factions and everything? This goes back to the great writing I was talking about with Veronica Roth, because she wrote the book in such a way where you start thinking some of these things. I also thought that Divergent had some great themes as well, with family, with your place in society, with like what you think your social status is and everything. I also liked most of the surprises that were in the book as well. Like, there was just one surprise where I sort of figured out like what the surprise was, and I was like, oh yeah, well, that makes sense since that happened before. But really, there were just some surprises that happened where it was like, wait, what? And I'll talk about those surprises in a second in the spoiler section of this review. The only other good thing I have to say about Divergent is that Veronica Roth did a good job with the pacing of the book, I thought. Like, when the slow parts happened, they were slow, but again, Veronica Roth did good writing in a way where it's like, when the slow parts were happening, they were interesting and you were involved with them. And you were really involved with parts that were really fast-paced and had a lot of action to them and were going just really quick, and I was like, whoa. And actually there's one more thing I have to say about the book that's really good, and that's the ending. Because when the ending happens, you're like, wow, I need to read the next book for sure right now. And I like it when the first book in a series ends it like that, because, I mean, I'm sure everybody likes when the first book in a series does that, because it's like, wow, like, I don't know what's going to happen, and I'm like thinking some of these things are going to happen, so I need to read the next book to see if they come true. Are there any bad points about Divergent? I mean, you know, at first, like, after reading the first time, my first complaint was like the climax, because the climax sort of happens out of nowhere in a way, but then after reading it the first time, like a few days after reading it the first time, I was like, well, actually, it sort of makes sense, and now after reading it a second time, it's like, yeah, it makes sense. And some people I know of had a problem with the book because of the relationship in the book, like the romantic relationship in the book, and I was like, well, I sort of believed it. I mean, I believed it. And the reason I believed it was, again, with the writing that Veronica Roth gave us, and with the situations that the characters that were put in at the time and everything. So, what do I give Divergent, the book? I give it 4 out of 4 stars. It's a really good read. Is it as good as Hunger Games? Well, it's longer than the Hunger Games, that's for sure. It's I think almost 200 pages longer than Hunger Games. I can't remember like off the top of my head, but it is longer than Hunger Games, but still a really good read. If you're a fan of the Hunger Games and you haven't read Divergent yet, then I think you'll like it. If you're into young adult books, I think you'll like it. If you're a reader in general that reads all books, then I think you'll like it as well. Alright, spoilers for Divergent, the book. If you haven't read Divergent yet, then get out of here now, because I am spoiling, like, almost all the surprises that happen in here, and you shouldn't be here, because I just said saying all the surprises. Okay, bye. So let's talk about the surprise that I knew was coming. When Trish's father was talking about how Marcus's son transferred from abnegation to another faction, I was like, okay. And then a few hundred pages later, when Trish was asking for how, like, what faction he used to be in, because she knew in a way that she was from another faction, I was like, wait a second, and I flipped back to the beginning to see the person's name, and I was like, is this for Tobias? And when Trish asks for more and more questions about where he used to come from, it's like, well, it's obvious now that it's Tobias, since he was mentioned at the beginning of the book. And when the big reveal came that Forrest Tobias was like, yep, didn't see that coming. So let's get into the surprises now that really surprised me. The first surprise came from the first, it was like within the first 50 pages of the book when the choosing ceremony came. And then it was when Caleb went from abnegation to erudite, and I was like, whoa. Like, Veronica Roth was sort of foreshadowing just a few pages ago that, like, he was saying some weird stuff that made it sound like he was going to a different faction, but I was like, no way, he's not going to do that to his family. But then it happened, and I was like, what? Caleb, what the heck? The next surprise I want to talk about is Al's suicide, because I thought when Al was introduced, and when Four was introduced, and when Al had, like, emotions towards Triss, and when Triss and Four were sort of like getting to know each other more and more, I was like, oh, here comes the love triangle thing. But then no, Al commits suicide, and it's like, whoa, I didn't expect that to happen. Next is when Triss's mother dies, and that sort of surprised me the first time I read it, because like when it happened I was like, wait a second, what? And I reread the section where she died, and I was like, whoa, what? And I sort of knew from that point that Veronica Roth was setting character development properly for the next few books. And then when that chapter ends, when Triss's mother dies, and when it goes into the next chapter, it's when Will dies, and then when it happens, like, wait a second, what? Jeez, like, are you gonna kill everybody every chapter now? When Will died, I, like, stopped the book and was trying to think about, like, what I would do in Triss's position, and a lot of people have argued that they would have just injured Will if they could have. But I think what some people don't understand is that he was brainwashed. Like, he was still gonna try to kill Triss even though she injured him. And I knew from that point that was gonna create some conflict, obviously, with Christina. And it was if Christina was still alive, because we don't know where she is at this point, and we will never find out at the end of the book, because that creates more mystery, which wants us to read the next book. And then the final surprise of the book is when Triss's father dies, and when it happens, I was like, no, no more deaths now. And then I try to put myself in Triss's shoes, and I would have been like crying my heart out if I saw like two of my family members die in the same day in just like a short amount of time. I would have been like bawling my eyes out. And after the first time I read this book, I said to myself that like no one's safe. Like anybody can die at any time. I mean, it's like The Walking Dead where anybody can die at any time. And I like it when stuff like that happens because it surprises me as a reader and it surprises other readers that like that stuff as well. So that was my review for Divergent. I hope you guys liked it. Yeah, probably gonna review Insurgent next year when the movie comes out. And my Divergent movie review will probably be out in the following week. But other than that, guys, that's it.